I thought I'd start off with a little bit of background on this individual subject to help the council understand where this originated from. Within the city's adopted 2015 strategic plan, the council identified the deteriorating public infrastructure within downtown as a major challenge area. And those elements were, as the city went through the development of the 2015 strategic plan, it identified a number of challenges, both internal and external to the city, but it did identify a limited number of those as being what was termed in that plan a major challenge area. And that was an element or a specific challenge the city was facing that was more significant and definitely more potentially impactful to the community. After the adoption of that strategic plan in 2015, the council conducted 2 joint meetings with the Urban Renewal Agency Board of Directors or Board of Commissioners. And in that discussion, in those joint meetings, the discussion of the expansion of the Legacy Crossing District to include Main Street was identified as a priority for the agency to pursue. Amending the boundary to expand and include that portion of Main Street in the downtown area would provide the opportunity for the agency to partner with the City of Moscow on future downtown streetscape and public infrastructure improvements. The process of either creating or amending an urban renewal district includes a number of sequential steps. The first of those is the completion of an eligibility study is what we're here this evening to discuss. As I mentioned, that formation process starts off with an eligibility study, and typically the Urban Renewal Agency, oftentimes responding to the direction or request of City Council, will complete the eligibility study for an area that the city is considering for an urban renewal project. Once that eligibility study is complete, it would then be transmitted to the City Council, passed by resolution of the Board of the Urban Renewal Agency, then passed on for the Council's consideration. The Council then considers the eligibility study, and if the Council concurs that the area meets the definition of a deteriorating area and is appropriate for an urban renewal project, the Council would approve the study and authorize the creation of the district plan. The agency then prepares the district plan, and when it's complete, approves the transmittal of that plan to the City Council by resolution of the agency for the Council's consideration. Once the Council receives a plan or proposed amendment from the Urban Renewal Agency, the City Council refers it to the City's Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Commission is charged with reviewing the proposed plan or amendment for conformance with the City's adopted comprehensive plan. Once the Council has received that recommendation, the City Council would consider the plan during a public hearing, and if approved, would approve it by ordinance, which formally creates the district and any associated tax revenue allocation area that may be associated with the project. So as I mentioned, this evening we are here to looking at the very early stages of that process for amending Legacy with the eligibility study. The study is really intended to assess the project area to determine if conditions exist that would indicate the area is a deteriorated or deteriorating area. And those are two different definitions, but they're companion definitions in state statute, and they're included in the appendix of the eligibility study that you have this evening. Within those definitions, there are 10 specific criteria that are identified underneath Idaho Code, which assess the condition of both public and site improvements, structures, as well as other impediments to development. Maybe it's street layout or lot configurations or configurations of ownership that impedes the development and redevelopment of a specific area. As I mentioned before, the purpose is to determine whether the area meets the definition of a deteriorating or deteriorating area, and thus an urban renewal project is appropriate for that specific location within the community. So those 10 criteria start off with a substantial number of deteriorating or deteriorated structures, predominance of defective or inadequate street layout, a faulty lot layout in relation to size, adequacy, accessibility, or usefulness, insanitary or unsafe conditions, deterioration of site or other improvements, diversity of ownership, a tax or special assessment delinquencies that exceed the fair value of the land that may be inhibiting development of an area, defective or unusual conditions of title, existence of conditions which endanger life or property by fire or by other causes, or the final is really any combination of the foregoing 9 criteria. Now, this is really not a new eligibility study. This is an update to an eligibility study that was completed in 2007, but as that is over 10 years in age, we felt that it was appropriate and necessary for the agency to update that work. So the initial study was presented to the Urban Renewal Agency on August 7, 2007. That was completed by Harlan Mann. And at that point in time, it was a much larger area that was under consideration. There were two areas that were identified within the eligibility study, Area A, which is shaded in blue, and then the kind of pink color Area B. This map indicates, and there's a key there that you can't see, can't read at that scale, but identified locations where those 10 different criteria conditions were present. That, as I mentioned before, that was completed in 2007, so it has been over 10 years since that was completed. It did conclude that both Area A and Area B had characteristics that indicated that it was a deteriorating area and eligible for an urban renewal project. But this evening, we're just talking about a small, thin slice of Area B. Ultimately, when the district was formed in 2008, the boundary largely followed the Area A outline. And so that portion of Main Street that exists, well, all of Main Street, is just outside the urban renewal district boundary. That boundary runs just down the alley that is located on the west side of Main Street. So really what we're focusing on this evening is an update to this eligibility study that just covers this particular narrow slice of the downtown core. So we'll walk through those individual criteria, the first of which, as I mentioned, was substantial number of deteriorated or deteriorating structures. As noted in the 2007 study, there have been a number of buildings that have undergone renovation and improvements, but there still remain many that have had deferred maintenance and limited investment in the time period. We did conduct an assessment of the exterior appearance of those structures to identify whether any visible signs of private structure improvement or deterioration. The assessment indicated that over 17% of the structures within the assessment area contained one or more signs of deterioration, both either of the building or of site improvements on the site. And over 40% of the building facades were deemed to be outdated and not consistent with the National Historic District designation of the study area. A predominance of defective or inadequate street layout is criteria number 2. Generally, the street layout is consistent with what you'd see for a small urban area. Main Street traverses the north-south. Generally, the street layout is considered to be consistent and provides adequate access and circulation and is not to be considered defective or inadequate. The faulty lot layout or relation of size, adequacy, access, or usefulness. Again, within the study area, the lots vary widely in size. All the lots that are studied as part of this eligibility study were located on the west side of Main Street, so they are generally oriented in the east-west orientation, fronting on Main Street with access to the alley to the west. Generally, lot layout is consistent with what you expect in a historical downtown area and does not contribute to the study area being a deteriorating or deteriorated area. When looking at insanitary or unsafe conditions, there are some capacity issues within the sanitary sewer main that exists in 6th Street between Main and Jackson. That's mostly due to pipe size and slope, but it does have some surcharging that happens in some manholes within that segment that is limiting sewer service and presents a long-term maintenance issue and sanitary condition problems within that particular area. There also are virtually no ADA compliant crosswalks within this area. As you know, many of the crosswalks that exist in downtown were installed as part of the 1981 LID with exposed concrete aggregate and do not have the tactile warning strips or meet and grade requirements for current ADA standards. And so those do present safety hazards to those with sight impairments or mobility impairments within the downtown area. There are also a number of differential either settlement or lifting of sidewalks that present tripping hazards throughout the core, and those also present safety hazards to pedestrians and those with limited mobility. And there's also a fairly significant substandard lighting that exists in the downtown core. Those can both reduce public safety, either perceived or real, and visibility of pedestrians that traverse the area in periods of low lighting. The Musco Public Works Department conducted a public lighting study of the study area and indicated that lighting levels are adequate really in the immediate proximity of the existing light fixtures, but many of those fixtures are either spaced too far apart or having obstructions and competing with trees up in the tree canopy. That light levels dropped as low as 1/10 of a foot candle in between those light fixtures. That represents about 6.5% to 8.5% of recommended lighting levels, so much below what we'd like to see for both street lighting as well as sidewalk lighting in the downtown area. So there is a large variability in lighting with very bright spots as well as very dark spots between those fixtures, which creates difficulty for the human eye to adjust as both pedestrians and motorists traverse the corridor. This was just an example. This was included in the appendix of the eligibility study, but again, you can see the light areas that are shown by, this is really starting at the north end of Main Street and then heading south. Street center line here and sidewalks on either side, and curb lines in between. So you can see the lighting levels where it was well below standard or those substantially below standard, and then the yellow areas indicate where lighting was adequate. The deterioration of site or other improvements is really the predominant condition that was identified during both the 2007 study and this update. Throughout the study area, there are significant curb and sidewalk deficiencies and roadway deterioration that was observed. Other than some limited sidewalk reconstruction, much of the concrete is fairly old, cracking, displaced, uneven, or otherwise damaged in some way. As I mentioned before, there is significant differential lifting and settling that has occurred that create displacements in excess of a ½ inch. That is considered to be an ADA non-compliant condition when that occurs. And street curbing is in a similar condition. Many areas it's missing, broken, deteriorating after almost 40 years of maintenance and snow plowing and utilization through the downtown area. In many areas, it's also too low to adequately control drainage because of street overlays that have occurred over time. As I mentioned, none of the pedestrian ramps within the study area are compliant with current ADA standards. As I mentioned, the downtown revitalization project that was done in 1980 and 81, it's also resulted in installation of many of the benches, planters, garbage trash receptacles along Main Street, and many of those are in very poor and deteriorating condition as well. There have been some street surface maintenance projects that have occurred. Main Street received the most of it between 6th and up, I think, to about 2nd Street. But sections from 6th Street to 7th and 7th to 8th have a very poor asphalt condition rating of 40 or below in those segments. And there's also a portion of 4th Street east of Friendship Square as well that has a fairly low condition rating. This is a detailed map that's also included in the study that shows the areas of deficient infrastructure that were identified during that study. So the red dots identify deteriorating curbing, the blue dots indicate road deterioration, yellow is non-compliant ADA drops. So you can see that there's a fairly extensive pattern of deterioration throughout the study area. And these are just a few photographs kind of showing the condition of that hardscape, as I mentioned. Missing curb, cracking, deteriorated curbing, sidewalks, non-compliant drops as well throughout the downtown area. So it is definitely showing its age at this point, 40 years after that major renovation work downtown. Diversity of ownership, that was one. It is diverse in the downtown core, but that was not identified as something that is contributing to inhibiting growth or development in the area. Tax or special assessment delinquencies, there were none that were identified on record that we were aware of, so that does not appear to be an issue in the area. Or defective or unusual conditions of title. There was no record of any defective or unusual title that would contribute to a deteriorating area. Existence of conditions would endanger life or property by fire or other causes. Is noted in the study if predicted outcomes of climate change are realized and we have more frequent intense rainfall events, we will anticipate seeing increased stormwater events that will be impacting the study area. Even under current storm events, the main storm line main that extends from downtown east or west to the creek in 6th Street has some significant capacity limitations, and even minor flooding does occur today with significant rainfall events. So repairing curbing, adding catch basins, and increasing the storage capacity of that storm main system would help address that condition in downtown. And that does present a risk to property damage during those intense precipitation events. I guess on conclusion, and looking at the overall study area against the 10 identified criteria, as was concluded in 2007, we find that there is significant deterioration of the public infrastructure documented by the study that constitutes an economic and social liability by inhibiting access by persons with disabilities, normalizing and perpetuating site and building deterioration, and discouraging private investment, and by presenting a risk to persons or property within the study area. So those, I think, we feel does substantially impair or arrest the sound growth of the city and would be considered to be a deteriorating or deteriorated area. So the consideration for the council this evening, The Musk Urban Agency reviewed this at their meeting on March 1st, 2008, and approved the eligibility study and to approve the transmittal of it to the City Council at their meeting at that time. If the council concurs with the conclusions of the study, the council can approve the study and pass the associated resolution to authorize the Musk Urban Renewal Agency to prepare the plan amendment for the council's consideration. And with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any question you may have.
Questions for Bill? Good presentation. Well, we got two counselors up here that are on that. Herb, I'll start with you, Art, and then I'll go to Brandy, because you and Brandy are both on this.
Yeah, I think this is a program that we should begin to undertake and begin the studies. It's not going to happen overnight. It'll take some while to get done by way of developing the plans, as well as getting some more tax increment into the URA to be used for this. But getting it started means the wheels are turning, and we can get further towards revitalizing the Main Street hardscapes much sooner than if we did nothing. So I'm very heartily in support of this whole project.
Okay, Brandy.
Yeah, I think it's a very appropriate, small, one-time expansion of the existing Legacy Crossing District that is entirely appropriate and is needed, and I'm glad that we have that tool for the, to benefit the city and talk about, something that benefits the whole, a lot of people in the city, these improvements to just expand that district will accomplish that. So it was third time I think we've seen that presentation.
These two have seen it a number of different times. Other questions for Bill?
Well, seeing as I'm not hearing any, I think we should receive that eligibility study and authorize the Moscow Urban Renewal Agency to proceed with the development of the amendment to the Legacy Crossing Urban Renewal Plan.
Second that.
Okay.
In Your Honor, did that motion also include passage of the resolution?
No, it didn't. Is there a resolution?
It says, receive the eligibility study and approve the attached resolution to authorize the Moscow Urban Renewal Agency to proceed with the development of the amendment to the Legacy Crossing Urban Renewal Plan.
Just skipped over that part.
That's the part you missed that.
I didn't see it here.
Well, here, you want to read it over here? I got it right
No,
now.
I'll just take your word for it, thank you.
I just want to make sure the motion reflects the
So-
passage of the resolution.
Yes, it should reflect that.
So do we have that motion correct? Lori, you got that? Okay, any further discussion? I'll start the roll with Ann.
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you very much. Bill?